The last guest finally left, and the moment the door clicked shut, the mask fell off. Just like that. No slow fade, just the sudden heavy silence of a performance ended. I stood there in our perfectly staged living room, soft jazz still playing, half-empty wine glasses scattered around, and felt like a stranger in my own home. Linda was already clearing plates, her back to me, movement sharp. "You drank too much," she said, not even looking up. "I had 2 glasses," I muttered. 3. "And you interrupted Jeff twice." I wanted to argue, but what was the point? We'd had this fight 100 times before. Instead, I just exhaled and loosened my tie. "The party went fine, Linda." She paused, gripping a plate too tight. "It's always fine with you." That stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Fine was all we had left. Fine dinners, fine conversations, a fine marriage, on paper at least. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and caught my reflection in the dark window. 55 years old, and I looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that settles deep in the bones. "Emily called today," Linda said, softer now. "Yeah? How's she doing?" "Good. Asked if we'd come visit next month." I nodded, staring at the sink. "We should." A beat of silence, then almost under her breath, "She still doesn't know, does she?" I didn't answer. Of course she didn't. Our daughter had no idea her parents had signed divorce papers 6 months ago. No idea we were just waiting for the right moment, for the money to sort itself out, for the courage to tell the truth. Linda wiped her hands on a towel and turned to face me. For the first time that night, we really looked at each other. Her eyes were the same hazel they'd been 30 years ago, but now they just looked sad. "We can't keep doing this, Mark." I knew she was right, but knowing and doing were 2 different things. "I know," I said. And then, because I didn't know what else to say, I picked up my glass and walked upstairs, to the room that used to be ours. The bed was still made on her side. Always was. I sat down, listening to the quiet hum of the house, and realized the cruelest part of it all. We weren't just lying to everyone else. We were lying to ourselves. The divorce papers had been signed for 3 months now, folded neatly in the top drawer of my dresser like some shameful secret. Yet every morning, I still woke up in the same bed, in the same house, listening to the same familiar sounds of Linda moving through her morning routine in the room down the hall. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker as it gurgled out its dark brew, watching the steam rise in the early morning light filtering through the window over the sink. The house smelled like toast, and the faint floral scent of Linda's perfume lingering in the air. She entered the kitchen dressed for work, her heels clicking against the tile floor. When she saw me standing there, she paused, her hand hovering near the car keys on the counter. "You're still here," she said flatly. I took a slow sip of coffee, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. Where else would I be? Linda exhaled through her nose, that familiar sound of restrained frustration I'd come to know so well over 22 years of marriage. "We need to talk about the house." I nodded, staring into my mug. The market had tanked right when we decided to split. The mortgage was underwater by nearly $40,000. The math was simple. Neither of us could afford to leave. The silence stretched between us, thick with all the things we weren't saying. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the street, the sound buzzing through the quiet morning. "It's not just the money," I finally said, surprising myself with the admission. Linda turned from where she'd been rearranging papers in her briefcase. "Then what is it, Mark?" I studied her face, the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when we'd first met. The way her dark hair now had strands of silver woven through it. I wanted to say it was for the kids, that we were staying because Emily was finishing her senior year and Michael had just started college. That was true, partly, but not completely. "I don't know," I admitted, rubbing my thumb along the rim of my mug. Maybe I'm just scared. Linda's shoulders dropped slightly. Of what? Of being alone. The words came out quieter than I'd intended, but they hung between us all the same. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw something vulnerable flicker across her face before she looked away. Me too, she whispered. The admission hit me like a punch to the chest. We stood there in our kitchen, two people who had shared a life together, now bound not by love, but by fear and convenience. Linda picked up her keys, the metal jingling softly. We can't keep doing this forever. I know. She hesitated at the door, her back to me. I'll be late tonight, budget meetings. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with finality. I stood in the sudden silence of the empty house, the coffee cooling in my hands, and realized the terrible truth. We hadn't just fallen out of love. We'd let ourselves forget what love was supposed to feel like. Somewhere between mortgage payments and soccer practices and silent dinners, we'd settled for something less than love and called it marriage. And now, even after the papers were signed, we were still settling. For shared space instead of shared lives. For familiar misery instead of unknown possibilities. The coffee maker gurgled again, the sound too loud in the quiet kitchen. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl away, and wondered how much longer we could keep pretending this was enough. The answer, I suspected, was forever, if we let it be. And that thought scared me more than any empty apartment ever could. The alarm went off at 6:15, same as every weekday for the past 12 years. I reached over to silence it, my hand brushing against the cold, empty space where Susan used to sleep. The sheets on her side were still perfectly made, untouched. Downstairs, the coffee maker gurgled to life automatically. I'd programmed it last week after Susan left a note complaining I never refilled the water. The note was still stuck to the fridge, held up by a magnet from our anniversary trip to Sedona. The ink had faded, but the resentment behind it hadn't. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, measured, careful, like she was trying not to wake me, even though we both knew I was already up. You forgot to take the trash out, she said, pouring her coffee without looking at me. I'll get it tonight. Trash day is today. I clenched my jaw. I said I'll get it. She sighed, that long, weary exhale that meant I'd disappointed her again. I stared at my coffee, watching the steam rise in the quiet kitchen. We used to talk over breakfast. Now we just coexisted, orbiting each other like distant planets, bound by gravity but never touching. The morning passed in the usual silence. I showered while she dressed. She left for work without saying goodbye. I waited 10 minutes before heading out myself, just to avoid the awkwardness of walking to our cars together. At 6:30 p.m., I pulled into the driveway, noting Susan's sedan was already there. The kitchen light was on. For a fleeting second, I imagined walking in to find her smiling, dinner ready, the way she used to when we were first married. Instead, I found a Post-it on the counter. Your leftovers are in the fridge. I ate alone at the island, scrolling through my phone to avoid the silence. Upstairs, I heard the faint sound of the TV in the guest room, where Susan had been sleeping since last fall. Later, as I passed her open door on my way to bed, I paused. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at an old photo album in her lap. I recognized it, our honeymoon in Hawaii. She looked up, startled, then quickly closed the book. Just cleaning out some things, she said, her voice tight. I nodded, pretending not to see the dampness in her eyes. Right. I continued down the hall to my bedroom. Lying in the dark, I realized something terrible. We weren't just going through the motions. We were mourning. Not the death of our marriage, that had been over for years. We were mourning all the little deaths along the way, the lost laughter, the abandoned dreams, the love that had slowly suffocated under the weight of silence and Post-it notes. And the worst part? We'd been grieving alone, side by side, for so long we didn't even know how to do it together anymore. The rain was coming down hard that Thursday evening, drumming against the kitchen window like it was trying to get in. I stood at the sink washing the same dinner plate 3 times, watching the soap bubbles pop one by one. Sarah was at the table, flipping through mail with that tight-lipped expression she'd worn for months. "Electric bill's up again," she said, sliding the envelope across the table. I didn't answer, just kept scrubbing that damn plate. "Did you hear me?" Her voice had that edge now, the one that meant we were heading into dangerous territory. I turned off the water. "I'll take care of it." "That's what you said last month." She tossed the rest of the mail down. "Just like you said you'd fix the garage door and call about the insurance." Something hot and sharp rose in my chest. "I've been working 60-hour weeks, Sarah. When exactly am I supposed to—" "Oh, don't start with that." She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I work too, remember? But somehow the entire house is still my responsibility." The plate slipped from my hands and clattered into the sink. "You think I don't do anything? I think you stopped trying." Her voice broke on the last word, and that's when I saw it, the tears she'd been blinking back. We stood there, breathing hard, the refrigerator humming between us. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was, "When did we become like this?" Sarah wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know, but I can't do it anymore, Tom." There it was, the words we'd both been avoiding for years, hanging in the air between us like the smell of burnt toast after a bad morning. I looked around our kitchen, at the calendar still stuck on last month, at Sarah's favorite mug chipped on the rim, at the family photo from 5 years ago when we still knew how to smile at each other. All this time, I'd thought we were falling apart slowly, but standing there, I realized we'd already broken. We were just 2 people sweeping up the pieces every day, pretending we could glue them back together. Sarah sank back into her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 54 years. "Remember when we used to sit on the porch during storms?" she asked quietly. I did. We'd drink iced tea and count the seconds between lightning and thunder, her hand warm in mine. The rain kept falling. The clock kept ticking. And right then, I understood the terrible truth. Some things don't shatter all at once. They crack slowly, imperceptibly, until one day you realize they can't hold anymore, and no amount of wishing can put them back together. The realtor's website still sat open on my laptop when Karen walked in. I snapped it shut too quickly, the click echoing in our quiet bedroom. "Looking at places again?" she asked, setting down her laundry basket. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "Just curious," I lied. She nodded, folding a towel with precise movements. "Find anything nice?" "A little cabin near the lake," I heard myself say. 2 bedrooms, wood stove. Karen paused mid-fold. "Sounds peaceful." That surprised me. No sarcasm, no lecture about practicality. Just 3 words that hung between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Later, lying awake while Karen slept soundly beside me, I let the fantasy unfold again. The cabin, the solitude. Waking up to silence instead of the constant hum of our unhappy coexistence. I could almost smell the pine trees, feel the rough wood of the porch railing under my palms. In my imagination, I'd sit on that porch at dawn with a steaming mug, watching mist rise off the water. No arguments, no disappointed sighs, just quiet. The next morning, over coffee, Karen surprised me again. "Would you really go?" she asked suddenly. The mug froze halfway to my lips. "I don't know." She studied me with those sharp blue eyes that had seen right through me for 32 years. "I think you do." A car passed outside, its tires hissing on wet pavement. Somewhere in the house, a pipe creaked. "I thought about leaving too," she said softly. "Last year, when things were bad, looked at apartments near the college." This admission stunned me. "Why didn't you?" Karen turned her wedding ring around her finger, a habit she'd developed during our roughest patches. Same reason you haven't, probably. The coffee had gone cold. I stared at the dark liquid, seeing my own distorted reflection. That night I reopened the realtor's site. The cabin was still there, its wooden beams glowing golden in the listing photos. I imagined the life I could have there, simple, uncomplicated. Then I heard Karen coughing in the next room, that little dry cough she'd had since her pneumonia last winter. Without thinking, I got up and poured her a glass of water from the bathroom tap. When I brought it to her, she took it with both hands, her fingers brushing mine. "Thank you," she whispered. Standing there in the dark bedroom, I realized something that shattered my beautiful escape fantasy. I didn't just imagine running away from something. I was imagining running away from her. And after all these years, after all the hurt and silence and disappointment, that distinction still mattered. The cabin could wait. For now there was water to bring, and a woman who still reached for my hand in the dark. The church bells were ringing as I straightened my tie in the mirror for the third time. Through the bathroom door, I could hear Diane rustling in her dress, the familiar sound of her struggling with the zipper she could never quite reach on her own. My hand hovered near the doorknob. For 27 years that had been my cue, to step behind her, help with the zipper, kiss her bare shoulder afterward. My fingers twitched, but didn't turn the knob. "You ready?" Diane called through the door. "We can't be late for our own daughter's wedding." "I know," I said, adjusting my cufflinks, the ones she'd given me for our 20th anniversary. We met in the hallway, both pausing at the top of the stairs. Diane looked beautiful. The navy dress brought out the gray in her hair, the pearls at her throat catching the morning light. For a heartbeat, we were just another couple preparing for their child's big day. Then she held out her elbow. "Shall we?" I took it, feeling the warmth of her arm through the fabric. "We shall." The ride to the church passed in silence, just the GPS voice giving directions to a place we'd been 100 times before. Diane kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. I kept checking my watch. In the church parking lot, we sat for a moment, watching other guests arrive. "Remember our vows?" Diane asked suddenly. I stared at my hands. "Every word." She nodded, lips pressed tight. Then she reached over and straightened my collar, her fingers brushing my neck. "Let's give her a perfect day, okay?" The wedding was beautiful. Emily glowed. Diane cried discreetly into a handkerchief. I gave the father of the bride speech, making everyone laugh with stories of Emily as a child. When I mentioned all those family vacations, Diane met my eyes across the room and smiled, a real one, the kind that still made my chest ache. During the reception, we danced. Not the stiff, obligatory dance I'd expected, but a proper slow dance, Diane's hand in mine, her head resting against my shoulder just like always. The lavender scent of her shampoo mixed with the faintest hint of Chanel. "I miss this," she murmured into my jacket. I didn't ask what she meant. Didn't have to. My arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer as the band played "What a Wonderful World." When the song ended, we pulled apart. Diane wiped under her eyes carefully, preserving her makeup. "We should mingle," she said. I nodded, but as she turned to go, I caught her hand. "Diane?" She looked back, waiting. For a moment I wanted to say it all, that maybe we'd given up too soon, that maybe we could try again. But the DJ announced the cake cutting, and Emily waved us over, so I just squeezed her fingers. "You look beautiful today." Her eyes shimmered, but she smiled. "So do you." And that was it. Our final performance as husband and wife. Not with fireworks or fighting, but with a dance and a compliment, and all the love we still had but didn't know how to use anymore. As I watched her walk toward our daughter, I realized the cruelest truth about long marriages. Even when they end, some part of you still believes in forever. The moving van pulled away at 10:37 a.m. I know because I checked my watch as the taillights disappeared around the corner, taking the last of Margaret's things to her new apartment across town. The house echoed with every step I took. Hollow spaces where her bookshelf used to be, naked walls where her paintings had hung for decades. I found her standing in the kitchen, running her fingertips along the counter's edge. She'd left her keys on the table, the same set I'd given her after we bought this house in '98. "Remember when we thought this kitchen was huge?" she said without turning around. I leaned against the door frame. "Now we complain there's not enough counter space." A quiet chuckle escaped her. "We were so young." The morning light caught the silver in her hair as she turned to face me. Neither of us had planned this moment, hadn't rehearsed what to say when 32 years together came down to standing in an empty kitchen with nothing left but goodbye. Margaret picked up her purse, then hesitated. "You kept the photo albums?" "They're in the living room," I thought. "The kids might want to look through them sometime." She nodded, blinking rapidly. We both knew what we were really saying, that even divided we'd always be their parents, that some bonds outlast even this. At the front door, she paused with her hand on the knob. The September breeze carried the scent of the maple tree we'd planted when Michael was born. "You'll call if the furnace acts up again?" "I will." "And you have Mrs. Thompson's number for Margaret." I gently cut her off. "I'll be fine." She looked at me then, really looked at me, with those hazel eyes that had seen me through promotions and layoffs, through my father's funeral and our daughter's wedding, all the history between us distilled into one quiet glance. Then she did something unexpected. She reached up and straightened my collar just like she'd done every morning before work for 3 decades. Her fingers trembled slightly against my neck. "Take care of yourself, Robert," she whispered. I covered her hand with mine, holding it there for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You too." And then she was gone. No dramatic slamming door, no tearful embrace, just the soft click of the latch catching behind her. Through the window, I watched her walk to the car, shoulders squared against the weight of this moment. She didn't look back. I didn't expect her to. The house settled around me, full of absence. I walked to the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea out of habit before catching myself. As I poured the second one down the sink, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't the end of us. The real goodbye had happened months ago, in 100 silent moments, when we stopped sharing inside jokes, when her side of the closet slowly emptied, when we began calling it your bedroom instead of ours. What happened today wasn't an ending. It was just the quiet acknowledgement of something that had already been true for a long time. I carried my tea to the porch and sat in the late morning sun, watching the maple leaves flutter in the breeze. Somewhere across town, Margaret was probably doing the same, 2 people alone together, as we'd somehow become without even noticing. The morning doves called from the power lines, their sad cooing the only sound in the stillness. I sipped my tea and let the sun warm my face, understanding at last that sometimes love doesn't end with a bang, but with the quietest of goodbyes. So soft you might miss it if you weren't paying attention,